Hi, this is Rob Polenic of Brutal Iron Gym. We had a YouTube viewer reach out and ask about how to grow their chest. Steven reached out and said that he's been training his chest for a while. It's a major focus of his, but it doesn't seem to be growing. So I shared 5 tips with him that I want to share in today's video. Tip number 1 is to pay attention to your tempo. We can improve our mind-muscle connection, being able to feel the muscle that we want to grow, by slowing down our tempo, especially in our warm-ups and the first few working sets. By going slower, you can better feel which muscles are stretching, which muscles are contracting, and you can minimize the involvement of non-targeted muscles. So especially on chest flies or chest presses, the slower you move, the more you can mentally pay attention to your chest stretching and squeezing during the movement. That leads into the second tip, which is weight selection. We want to start with lighter weight loads so that way it allows us to better control our tempo. What I suggested to Steven was that across his working sets, he can start with a slower tempo and lighter weight, and then slowly increase those elements. Sometimes people ask, what should I do? Heavyweight or lightweight, slow or fast? Why not do everything? So start with your first few working sets, and especially your warm-ups, with a slower tempo, lighter weight load, and then towards the end of your working sets, you can go ahead and push the tempo a little bit, try a little bit heavier weights, so that way you get a blend of both lighter weight with slow tempo and heavier weight and the aggression and satisfaction we feel from moving heavier weights. And then our next 2 tips have to do with exercise selection. The first is to use pre-exhaust. We want to do an isolation movement before we do our compound movements. When it comes to chest growth, that leads to chest flies being done before our chest presses. You'll see that in all of my workouts, and I've stolen that concept from IFBB pros and people I've watched over the years, is especially if we start with an isolation movement, we can really feel the chest stretching and squeezing, stretching and squeezing. And the benefit of that is that with an isolation movement, there aren't other muscles getting involved that can interfere with what we're feeling. For example, when we're doing compound movements like chest presses, you are often using much heavier weight than you would in an isolation movement, so that involves more stability muscles. And with presses, you're going to have possibly the front side of your shoulder and definitely your triceps involved, so it can be harder to more isolate your chest. If you do pre-exhaust movements and you really fatigue and stress the chest before you get into the compound movements, it's sensitized and you're going to better feel it during those compound movements. Then the second tip with exercise selection is to stay with movements that you feel a good connection with. Sometimes people feel like they have to change their movements too often, and that leads to them not being very efficient with the exercises that they're doing. It is true that we don't want to get stale or stagnant in our training. If we're not making progression in reps or weight load, then we're likely not making progression in growth. So we want to make some changes, but we don't need to make too drastic of changes. Something I'll do in my training is for chest flies, I'll play around with the cable height for cable flies, being high, medium, or low. I'll sometimes do standing, bent over, or even seated, but I really like the way these feel, cable flies for me, and I especially like doing them closer to being between the cable stacks because that actually emphasizes the midline of the chest. The harder portion of the range of motion is actually when my hands are getting closer together. And that is opposing to what we feel in chest compound movements like presses, where typically the hardest part of the range of motion is when our chest is most stretched at the bottom. So I like complementing those two. So for me, I really like cable flies as my pre-isolation movement, my pre-fatigue movement, but I do create variety by changing cable positions and body positions. But I still keep the thing that I like. When it comes to presses, I almost always do a slight incline because I want to include my upper chest. So the bench that I have has a 10 degree, a 20 degree, and a 30 degree incline. So I'll play around with those and go back and forth from workout to workout. But again, keeping something that I am connected well with, which is dumbbell chest presses, and a slight incline to make sure I'm targeting the area I want. However, I can play around with slight position changes, and I can also play around with my rep ranges. Maybe one workout I want to aim for lower reps, so that would be maybe 5 to 10 reps. Another workout I might do ultra high, 15 to 20 reps. Another workout I might be somewhere in the middle of 10 to 15 reps. So exercise selection is important in that we want to stay with movements that we feel our muscles working the best, but we do want to create enough variety that we can still make progress in reps and weight moved. And then the fifth and final tip is to pay attention to your nutrition. You want to make sure you're eating enough protein and that you're doing that consistently every single day. Often what I see with beginner clients is they eat a lot of protein on training days, but then on non-training days, they don't prioritize it and they often fall short. What's frustrating and sad is that actually the day after you train is when you're going to grow the most, when the muscle is still healing and damaged. So we actually want to peak our protein post-workout and then make sure that we maintain proper protein intake for 12, 24, even 36 and 48 hours after, depending on the volume and intensity of the workout. So we want to make sure that we're consuming enough protein, not only on training days, which is what people tend to do automatically, but also on non-training days. How much protein is enough? A typical starting recommendation is 0.8 grams per pound of body weight. Now you can definitely increase above that to see if you get more muscle growth from that increase. However, make sure you're paying attention to your total calories as well. If you increase your protein, your total calorie count may go up, and likely will if you're adding food. So you want to make sure that your protein sources are very lean and that you're still controlling your carbs and fats, so that way you're not gaining unnecessary body fat. Okay, so those are 5 tips on how you can better grow a stubborn body part. And Stephen, I hope you enjoyed these tips and I hope they're working out well for you.